All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you.
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Good evening and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts.
I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa. And we are back after a short hiatus to usher in our penultimate month of the monster.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, I am a little surprised that we have actually been able with two guys with such amazing ADHD that we've been able to keep ourselves focused enough to keep the month of the monster alive since when was it? March that we started it?
I think it was March. Yeah, and I think there was only one break when we were like, all right, we need to do Late Night with the Devil, and it didn't fit that 1 month. But other than that, yeah, I think we started it in March.
I am very proud of us.
I am too.
Yeah, sometimes you got to pat yourself on the back, and so Daniel, I pat you on the back because really it's you. I'm just along for the ride. So as we kick off November a week late rather, we're talking werewolves.
We are.
And so in a section I'm calling The Myth Begins, we're discussing Universal's classic 1941 horror film, The Wolfman. So obviously the Wolfman is one of these legendary Universal monsters. Daniel, what's your relationship with this movie?
So, honestly, this is I've said it before and I'll keep saying it. Universal movie monsters are a massive gap in my horror resume. So while I'm very familiar with werewolf lore and a bunch of werewolf movies that we kicked around, this was my first time actually seeing Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. And to see this, I really enjoyed this movie. There's something, and I think that we say something similar every time we do one of these Universals, is there's something about these old monster movies that really scratches an itch. It really just kind of gets you something that you're not getting out of modern movies. There's a feel to it. There's a look to it. It's just all of those things. The entire experience of going back and checking these out is and watching them for you again, a lot of them for me the first time, it really satisfies something. It makes you understand, kind of where so many people's love for this genre came from. It really helps you to wrap your head around why this has had, through its ups and downs, why it is the industry that it is. My favorite thing, however, about going back and watching these is kind of seeing comparing it, the societal, what scares us elements of things, going back and seeing these where it's like, this is the type of movie that when this came out, like this was really scary. Watching it now, I was never scared watching this movie, but it also does such an excellent job telling a story, creating great characters. To go back and see some of these special effects and realize that people were doing this stuff in 1941 is incredible. Yeah. I was really impressed with a lot of the effects. Every time we watch one of these, I get a little bit closer to understanding your love for classic black and white movies. There's something about the acting and the presentation, the way that these people interact that you don't see anymore. And it's not that it's more stilted. You feel like you're just getting a glimpse into something different, but there really is something about these that that I don't think modern movies are trying to recreate, but at the same time, I don't think there are certain elements that they're not getting close to that you get when you go back and see these. And so I really enjoyed this. I thought that it did a great job of creating what it wanted its mythos to be. It does exposition without overdoing exposition.
Yes.
It does a lot of really great things, and this ended up being a really fun watch. At an hour and 8 minutes. I mean, you watch episodes of TV shows that last longer. You know, the entire last season of Stranger Things, every episode was over an hour and 8 minutes long. And this is a complete and total story, beginning, middle, and end in an hour 8. I was impressed.
I have to agree, particularly with that last statement there. One of the things I love so much about Universal Monster movies is that they are packed to the gills. Whether Gillman is in the movie or not, the gills with story. From the moment the reel starts to the moment it ends, there is no wasted space in the movie. Every bit of downtime is absolutely necessary for coming down from whatever scene just played out or is building up to the next scene.
Right.
And the pacing in these things can seem slow by today's standards. But this really is classic storytelling. It works. It's effective. Like you say, it may not necessarily scare you because the images today, you look at the Wolfman as seen with Lon Chaney in the makeup. It's not frightening in the same way as something like An American Werewolf in London.
Right.
That is horrifying. Those transformation scenes are absolutely bonkers and still hold up today. But this is 1941. What was accomplished here was a really tightly packed story about a family curse.
Yeah.
And that is universal horror in every sense of the word. Like, Universal's horror movies were always about things that were in fact universal, things that everyone could identify with in some regard or another. Every one of us is terrified of becoming our parents. Every one of us is terrified of passing on all of the shit that we hate about ourselves.
Yeah.
That's what this movie's about. And when you look at what this movie does, it does exactly the same thing that Frankenstein does. It does exactly the same thing that Dracula does, that the Mummy does. It makes it a human story. And that's something that I think a lot of monster movies today are lacking. And when you look at who's making the best horror movies today, and I mean objectively, the best horror movies today, they're always human stories. It's not about the special effects, although they might have great special effects. It's not about the over-the-top crazy stuff that's happening. It's about, where's the human element in this story? It's why we don't stop talking about Ari Aster. It's why we don't stop talking about Robert Eggers. It's why we don't stop talking about Damien Leone.
Yeah.
Fuck, tell me that that's not about someone coming to terms with the brutality of life. You know, that's what universal horror is really about. It's about, how can we wrap our heads around the horror that we, as a society, inflict on ourselves. And one of the things that this movie does, I think, really, really well is it learns from all of the movies that came before it. Because if you look at Dracula, which is the first of what we consider, where we consider universal horror to begin, because there's a lot of universal horror that comes before, particularly, the Phantom of the Opera is always included in there.
Right.
As you know, in the pantheon of the universal monsters. But it's a silent film, and film changes a lot from the silent era to the talkie. And Dracula presents itself like a play. It doesn't really present itself like a movie. Frankenstein learns from that. And from Frankenstein, we continue to learn. Frankenstein is such a sobering movie, man. Like there's no humor in it at all. And very quickly, we start to see that when you insert humor into horror, it becomes a much more enjoyable experience. It's why The Bride of Frankenstein always ranks higher than the original Frankenstein.
Right.
And this movie, coming in 1941, 10 years after the original Frankenstein, has all of those Frankenstein movies, all of the Dracula movies. There's 3 in that series before this movie comes out, right? There's a Mummy.
Right.
There's even another werewolf movie. There's Werewolf of London.
Oh, yeah. I saw
1935. It learns from all of those things. And it says, how can we entertain you so that we keep your ass in this seat and you're not going back to get more popcorn?
Yeah. It does a great job of that because, like we said, it tells an excellent story even with its limited runtime. So let's get into that story. Let's talk about what's presented to us. So in a section that we're calling Romani Legends, which we are doing the right thing, and we are using the word Romani, not the word they use in the movie, but we're fine.
The movie might have taken place in 1941,
right,
but
exactly.
we have progressed.
Correct. So in a section that we're calling Romani Legends, let's talk about the story of the werewolf as presented in The Wolfman here. What did you think about the way they did this?
Listen, I say this as a person who is a bigger fan of Werewolf of London than I am of this one. The mythology in this movie is solid.
Yeah.
It is rock solid. And it might go back to the original Romani myths of the werewolf. I don't know, because I've never actually looked into that sort of thing. What I do know is that everything I know about werewolves begins and ends with this movie.
Right.
There is nothing that is done in the werewolf genre after the Wolfman that is revolutionary as far as mythology goes. Sure, there's lots of special effects and there's great acting and blah, 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 blah. But what is a werewolf? You learn exactly what a werewolf is in every single werewolf story.
Right.
From this movie. A silver bullet, a knife with a silver handle, right? One of the things that I love about the mythology here, which is dropped in a lot of the other werewolf movies, is the pentagram in the hand of your next victim.
Yeah.
And I think that story element is one of the best story elements here because it allows us to look at Larry Talbot and sympathize with him. It allows us to feel the pain because he knows this is going to be the person that I'm going to kill next. And it's such an awful feeling. And I think that today people respect Boris Karloff and people respect Bela Lugosi in a way that Lon Chaney doesn't get.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because
to the point that I didn't realize that it was Lon Chaney Jr. until I watched this movie. I knew the name Lon Chaney. And then when I went to Google it, I was like, this guy was old in 41. This couldn't have been him.
Right. It's his son. Yeah. It's Chaney Jr. But he is the only actor in the Universal Monsters history to play the monster in every iteration of this Wolfman.
Right.
Because the Wolfman from Werewolf in London doesn't exist in this continuity. So it's a totally different thing because Dracula had different actors. including Lon Chaney Jr. Frankenstein's monster had different actors, including Lon Chaney Jr. The Mummy had different actors. You guessed it, including Lon Chaney Jr. Like, he is a legend. And he's often overshadowed by his father, who did his own makeup. And like that guy was, I mean, he was an artist and he was amazing. And what he did for horror in the silent movie era cannot be understated. I'm sorry, it can't be overstated. Like, there's no amount of praise you can give Lon Chaney Sr. that is undue. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Lon Chaney Jr. blows my socks off every time I see this movie. He's so human. He allows you to really kind of get into the character of Larry Talbot. And I think something that Universal, I wouldn't say had an issue with, but something that they were criticized about is that as great as the human element in the movies were, the monsters were so cool that it always overshadowed the humans.
Right.
No one is thinking like, hey, so what's Basil Rathbone doing in Frankenstein? They're like, nah, man, show me the fucking monster, They don't want to know. They don't care. They don't care. They want to see what the monster's doing, right? So in this case, however, I think that the human Larry Talbot overshadows the Wolfman.
Right.
It's such an integral part to the story. And his performance, we'll get to the performances, but it is so integral to this movie that you really don't have a story without this human element.
Yeah, like I was super impressed by that part of it. The fact that this movie wasn't, yes, it's called Wolfman. And it is about a guy who becomes a werewolf, but it's just that. It's about a guy who becomes a werewolf and the trials and tribulations that come with that. But ultimately, it's about him. It's about John Talbot. It's not just about like, oh, what crazy things can we do when he's a wolf? It's about the fact that this shit is a curse. And that brings me to my favorite part of this movie, is the fact that because this was made so long ago, it's so true to the Western European folklore of what was a werewolf, down to the fact that, it's easy to look at the makeup that we're presented with here when he's the Wolfman and say, well, that doesn't hold up, except the early legends of werewolves weren't about, a guy who turned all the way into a fucking wolf and just ravaged people. It was about a guy who gained wolf-like features and essentially became like walking primal nature. Mm-hmm. It was a guy that when you looked at him, you didn't go, oh shit, that's a wolf. And then you found out later after you killed him and he turned back into a man that he actually was a man. It was a different thing. A werewolf wasn't just the ability to turn into a wolf. It was the idea that a werewolf is its very own thing. And I loved that. Mm-hmm. I thought that was an incredible way to go about this. The way that they built the mythology of that through the Romanis that had come into town. That fucking scene, man, where Bela Lugosi is reading the girl's fortune with the tarot cards and just like keeps panicking. Like he's so stoic and Bela Lugosi,
right?
when she first starts, and then he starts flipping over some cards, and it's like, oh no, we'll get back to that one. We'll talk about that one later. And you see him starting to crack, and then you see the pentagram on her hand, and you see him fall apart, and you're starting to put these pieces together. The way that they tell that story was so good. So good. And I really enjoyed that. I did enjoy we talk about movies kind of being time capsules. It is always funny sometimes when you go back and you catch these story elements that are like, okay, so that flew in 41, right? Kind of weird as somebody in 2024 watching it for the first time. The whole concept of once she found out that he was peeping with the telescope, even though it was on accident, she was fully dressed. It wasn't, still voyeurism, but at that point she was like, oh, you've made a joke about it for so long. Now it's just a cute anecdote that we'll tell our kids or whatever, But so I did enjoy that aspect. I love the mythology. I loved the idea of everybody rallying, one, to protect the town, but then two, the way that everybody kind of rallies around the Talbot family. And it's like, oh no, don't talk to him yet. He's been through a lot. Oh, he must have thought the wolf bit him. Like that way that this family means so much to the town that everybody's kind of willing to let correlation, not necessarily causality, right? But they're willing to just erase all of those lines. And you watch that and you go, well, that's still true now, 83 years later, right? You're a big enough name in the town. Everybody gives you the benefit of the doubt. How many times have we heard the phrase, oh, but he's got such a promising future,
Yeah.
And so you see things that are extremely specific to 80 years ago. Like you could get away with looking at a girl in her window with a telescope. And then you look at something 83 years later, it's like, we still have not evolved as a society, because if you have money and a name, then people are willing to go, I'm sure he didn't kill anybody. And so I do love watching these old ones and finding those types of things. I love the way that we watch his character evolve throughout the course of the story. I love the way that we see him just, he's just kind of building a telescope. He's a normal guy. Then it's like, okay, he's kind of horny, so he's hitting on the girl or whatever. And then you watch him until that scene, man, where he knows he's figured it all out. He knows exactly what's going on. And he goes to the shop and he's like, I've got to go. I've got to get far away from here. And she's like, let me pack a few things. I'll come with you. And he's torn. He doesn't know. We watch him completely and totally fall apart while coming to terms with what he realizes he's done. And like we keep saying, they packed all of this into an hour 8. An hour 8, we watch entire character arcs. We watch a full story. I love the idea of the Romanis coming to town because they're gonna have the party because one of them died. He's moved on. Let's celebrate life. All of that. But that scene where she realizes that he's been bitten and everything, and then you're just frantically watching them pack up all of their caravans and getting the hell out. And it all happens so fast. It's nonstop. One of the things about watching one of these movies, you can't look away. Like every time I would look down to like write a note, I'd be like, wait, hold on. Like I'm watching it.
What did I miss?
Yeah, like I'm watching it with my roommate, and he'd be like, yeah, you should go back 15 seconds. Like while I was taking the time to write Silver Cane, I was like, well, shit, now they're talking about pentagrams. Like I'm trying to
what the fuck? How did we get here?
But they're so good at it, but it never feels forced. It never feels ridiculous. It's such a good story. It's the same thing I said when we watched Black Lagoon. It's the same thing I've said with so many of these monster movies. It's the same thing I'll say if we ever get to King Kong. And you've already said it. It's such a fucking human story, man. It's even though, I would like to assume that none of our listeners have ever run into a werewolf. You watch this movie and you go, I feel like I know people who have been in a similar situation, right? Like I feel like this is applicable to life now. And the fact that you can watch an 83-year-old movie and pull that, that's something like we don't get that now out of the horror movie. Like, let me get Boomer on it for a second. And as much as we praise a lot of the new stuff because of a lot of the wonderful things that they're doing, What we're not getting now is tight stories that make you sit back and relate it to your own life. You know, we might get an element like, yeah, I've grieved. I've lost somebody. This is really fucking horrible what's happened to them, and I'm glad I didn't go through that, but I've had that moment. But you just have that moment. By packing all of this into an hour 8, you are never taken out of that situation where you're comparing it to something. There's not a 5-minute scene of just somebody crying and destroying something. You know, there's not that type of story building that's really about showing you their story. By packing this in the way they do, every time you kind of relate to something or you draw one of these comparisons, it's time to draw another comparison. You don't sit and wait. You don't stew on anything when a movie's an hour long. You move from one thing to the next, and you draw and you go. And that's something that I think is really kind of untouchable. I can barely, especially 4 or 5 beers deep, I can barely tell a story in an hour 8, and I've never turned into a fucking werewolf, right? Like,
that you can remember.
Right, exactly. Like, I'm trying to tell a story about last weekend, and an hour 20 in, people are like, so I'm like, I don't remember where we started. But we're here now. So let's go with this one. I can't tell a coherent story in an hour 8. They pack all of this into, I didn't know anything to now I know it all. And I'm happy with the way it went.
I think a perfect correlation there. I saw Terrifier 3 this weekend.
Right.
I loved it. I think it's probably the best in the series.
Can't wait.
But it's 2 hours and 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I loved it, because I love these Terrifier movies, and I praised, Damien Leone just a little bit ago, there's not as much story in Terrifier 3 as there is in this movie. And it is almost twice as long.
Yeah,
in fact, Terrifier 2 is more than twice as long as this movie. A lot happens in Terrifier 2.
A lot.
But I would still say there's not as much story as there is in this 1 hour and 8-minute film. Universal old Universal manages to pack so much exposition without giving over exposition. That was something that our former co-host Neri used to say all the time about old comics.
Oh man, old comics. That's why
I'm a big fan of like 60s and 70s Marvel comics.
That's why you can't stand Claremont.
Right. Yeah. And like that X-Men stuff is like my jam, dude. Like that's my favorite stuff. But I understand where he's coming from. And there is a lot of old movies where there's over exposition.
Right.
You don't really get that in Universal horror movies, especially the monster movies. Like you get jam-packed. Like here's like the opening scene where a narrator or a card is going to come up and tell you stuff. And now we're just going to run with this thing.
Yeah.
And it really is an hour and 8 minutes of, it's not nonstop because there is downtime where you're appreciating the romance, where you're appreciating the humor. But every frame is absolutely necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a word you use there that I think we would kind of glossed over, and we should get, there's the humor in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for as much as they're packing it in, this movie made me laugh out loud a couple times, but there was one fucking scene, I'm giggling thinking about it. It caught me so off guard the way they did it. There's a scene where Talbot's talking to his dad, and his dad says, he goes lycanthropy, schizophrenia, and he's talking, and Talbot goes, it's all Greek to me, and his dad, stone face, not a smile for miles, just goes, well, it is Greek. I lost my shit. When I tell you, I had to pause this movie. I was laughing so hard as tears streamed down my face because it was one of the most perfectly delivered one-liners that I have seen in a very long time. Like that was like, and I say, I'm going to compare it to something that's newer, but is older to me. Like that is, that's like a Naked Gun, like Airplane, perfectly delivered one-liner that just hits you in the face. And if you don't get it, then it's fine. But if you do,
because the next one will get you.
Yes. But it was just, God, it was so funny the way he did it. And then just like moves on. Like, I'm not going to acknowledge that my son's being an idiot right now.
Right.
And I love that there are still the moments like that you can laugh and you can just enjoy these things because this movie was very, very funny at times. Like I said, before he admitted that he'd seen her through the telescope, when he plays it off as like being a psychic and she's kind of starting to buy in, like she's not sure which way she's going to go. So he never really waffles on it. He just kind of starts to ease off the gas a little bit. Like, okay, maybe this isn't the right move, but that back and forth that they've got right there, while it's sweet and it's romantic, it's also really funny to watch him navigate that situation. It's like, well, I've dug this hole calling myself a psychic. Let's see what happens.
Right.
And so I did enjoy when this movie did ease up and let it, and it was funny.
So speaking of easing up, we're talking a little bit. Actually, we've talked a lot about little character moments.
Yeah.
So in a section that I'm calling Legends and Icons, because really, when you stop and you think about this, I mean, there are so many iconic actors, legendary actors in this movie in bit roles.
Yeah.
Daniel, who from the cast, if you're like this, I can only talk about one, and obviously we're going to talk about more than one,
right?
But you can only talk about one. Who would it be?
So, and you're right. What's funny about watching these old Universals is it reminds me of watching British movies now. Whenever you watch a movie with a British cast, you can always immediately like pinpoint 5 of the things they've all been in, and like 4 of the things where those 2 are together and these 2 are together.
Right.
It's
Harry Potter, Doctor Who.
Right. Exactly.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Nailed it. Throw Love Actually in there, and now we're good with all of them because they're all in Love Actually. When you watch these old Universals, this is, and we're gonna, but this movie has the Invisible Man, Dracula, and the Wolfman in it, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna start off with Bela Lugosi as the aptly named, Bella, right? It's so funny in a very, like you said, a bit role. It's so interesting to watch him when he first shows up, and he's very much Bela Lugosi, right? He comes on. He's a Romani fortune teller. He's very, very drab and stoic, and he's kind of sitting there, and he does the fortune. But man, the way we see him shift, and he becomes very un-Dracula-like as he becomes very emotional and very scared. That was what got me, was seeing Bela Lugosi playing someone who was scared. He became very aware of his situation and very afraid of what he knew his very near future was going to be. And we watched that play out, and he did such an amazing job telling a great story in such a short amount of time. I don't need to know what happened to him before this moment, because why? Because I know he's a werewolf. Yeah. And I know that he's doomed to that until he returns to the earth, though his path be thorny, right? He did such a good job of not chewing scenery, but absolutely stealing the 1.5 scenes that he was in. I was super impressed because, like I said, it was very un-Dracula-like, which is obviously who everybody's going to think of when you see and hear the name Bela Lugosi.
Yeah. And I think it's so important for him to play that role because obviously things like cultural appropriation were not things that
Right.
we were concerned about back in the 1940s. But to have a Romani character played by Bela Lugosi not only lends credence but gravitas to the thing.
Right.
By allowing Bela Lugosi to play the role of the guy who's delivering all the mythology to you. You're as the director, as the casting director, letting the audience know, hey, you guys in the back that were making out, you guys in the front that are throwing popcorn at the screen, stop. You've got to pay attention right now, because right now is where everything is happening. Because you see that fucking guy there? That's Count Dracula.
And he's actually Eastern European, right?
He is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You sit down and shut the fuck up and you listen when Bela Lugosi is talking. I can't remember where exactly Bela Lugosi's from. I'm going to tell you in a second. I'm looking it up. He's Hungarian. No, yeah, Hungarian.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah. Born in Romania. Born in Lugos, Romania.
So he's like from Transylvania.
Yes, dude. Yes. Yeah. Well, remember, he was hired to play Count Dracula because he was in the Broadway play playing Dracula.
Right.
And he was hired specifically because he could do the Transylvanian accent, because it was the way that he spoke.
It's just his accent. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's also like, we don't often think of it this way, because when you think of like the towering giant in the Universal monster pantheon, you think Frankenstein.
Right.
So you think, Boris Karloff is the big guy. Bela Lugosi was just as tall as he was. I mean, this was a massive, massive man. He was huge. So when you see him as Count Dracula and you hear him as Count Dracula, like, that's fucking Dracula, dude. And then later he plays Frankenstein, the monster. In the fourth Frankenstein movie, that's him playing Frankenstein.
Okay.
Yeah, he plays the monster in the fourth one. So it's fucking wild to me that Universal makes that decision. Like, hey, this is not going to be the starring role, but we need someone with the ability to deliver these lines, because they're a little absurd, right? But we need someone to deliver these lines with the weight that is going to make the audience listen the moment they see him and the moment they hear his voice. There's no other actor that could have done that than Bela Lugosi.
Right.
It's a masterful bit of casting there, and also like right on the fucking nose, man, because you picked a Romanian dude to play the Romani. So that's one of the things I've always loved about this movie. I'm glad that you mentioned him, because now I can move on to the person I really want to talk about. And I think that he is, not so secretly, my favorite actor in all of the Universal Monster movies. Claude Rains.
Yeah.
The fucking man. Claude Rains. All right. Most people associate Claude Rains with The Invisible Man, and rightfully so, because he plays him like a fucking maniac, and my God, what a performance, right? It's scary, and we talked about that when we did The Invisible Man last month, that it is a scary performance that he gives, totally different to the Adrian Griffin that we get in the modern, reimagining of that story. Brilliant, though. The other thing is that he's been in so many different kinds of movies, right? Obviously, he's in the Wolfman. So horror also. This guy has, I think, the single funniest line ever delivered in any movie ever. In Casablanca. Very easy to forget that Claude Rains is also the same guy who appeared in The Adventures of Robin Hood, the Errol Flynn movie, where he plays Prince John. All right. Very easy to forget that he appears in a bunch of those Errol Flynn movies, like Seahawk and The Prince and the Pauper, right?
Mr. Smith goes to Washington.
Mr. Smith goes to Washington. All right. Right alongside Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah.
Right? There's the Wolfman, Casablanca in 1942, right? And then shows up in 1943 in the only color Universal monster movie, The Phantom of the Opera. I think he gives an insane performance in that movie. Is it as scary as the original Phantom of the Opera, the silent film with Lon Chaney Sr.? No. But that movie's a work of art, man.
Right.
I mean, it is just gorgeous to look at. And it doesn't stop there, because then he continues on playing alongside Bogey again in Passage to Marseille. He works all throughout the 1940s, right? Slows down in the 60s, but the 60s ain't no slouch either, because he's got shit like The Lost World, like Lawrence of Arabia, the greatest story ever told. I mean, he seriously doesn't stop. But in Casablanca, in 1942, he delivers the greatest, funniest line of all time. When the Germans show up to Rick's nightclub and they say, you know, hey, we're busting you because there's gambling that's going on. He looks at the German officer and he says, I am shocked, positively shocked to discover that there is illegal gambling going on here. And then the waiter comes up to him and he says, you're winning, sir. And he goes, thank you very much. It is said in a way that only Claude Rains can deliver that line. And that's exactly how he delivers, quite literally, 80% of all the humorous lines in this movie. They're all his. He is so good at being funny, but he's also so good at being genuine. Like, you can see in him, in that last scene, when he's looking down at his son, the horror of what his family trauma has wrought.
Right.
It's heartbreaking. It never gets easy to watch this movie because you want the family history to be erased every time.
Yes.
And there's nothing you can do about it. And it's so fitting that he kills his son and not that the son kills him.
Right.
When he sees that at the end, it's like, I'm the one who did this. It's me. I got to fix my family shit for me, but I got to fix it for my fucking kids too.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
He, like, and he's of course the one who delivers the line that brought me to tears in this one. I mean, he's amazing in this. You know, I know, like I said, my first thought when I did see him was, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I know Claude Rains' Invisible Man. Haven't seen that, but like I said, I was like, wait a minute. I was like, oh, I know this dude from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Like, you know, because everybody at some point, you know, like in civics class in like the 8th grade, had to at least watch clips of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And so, but he's stellar in this, dude. And you're right, it's that way that he's always defending his son, but not just for the purpose of defending his son, but because his son is his lineage. His son is his line. If his son is mentally ill and or a werewolf, then where does that leave him? Because we're never led to believe that there are, you know, other Talbots out there, right? There's just this one. And so it's not just a guy fighting for his son's innocence. It's a guy fighting for his family line and desperately wanting for it to not be true. But then once he realizes it is true, just wanting to fix it, just wanting something to be different, wondering what could have what could have transpired differently that would have, come with a different outcome. So he's incredible. Next, I've got to go to the Queen of Bees herself, in Evelyn Ankers in this one. Man, she's if you say to somebody, close your eyes and picture a black and white Hollywood starlet, the generic image of a gorgeous black and white Hollywood starlet that you're going to have in your head is Evelyn Ankers. Even if you've never seen her, she is the B movie equivalent to like the Hat Man that people see when they're half awake, and it's like it's this international thing. She's the B movie actress equivalent of that. She is stunning in a non-assuming way. There's nothing about her that just stands out to where she's just incredible, but she is the image of a classic beauty when it comes to thinking of these movies. So one, great in that aspect. Two, the way that she again evolves as a character, the way that we see her is just kind of the girl in the store who's weird about the fact that she's getting hit on, and she goes on this a walk with her friend and this mysterious stranger who's just shown up, and then everything that that happens with her and her fiance, just the way that we watch her character evolve to the point that where she's just like, give me a minute to pack a few things and I'll come with you. This man has just admitted that he is a werewolf and has murdered people, and she's so all in, like 72 hours after meeting him, that she's willing to to just risk it all, leave it all behind and run away with him. And I never felt like it was an absurd thing, because the performance that Evelyn Ankers gives us in this, it feels like a logical progression, a very quick logical progression. But hell, Romeo and Juliet killed themselves in 72 hours, right? So it's an acceptable thing. But she did such a great job in never making any of that feel forced. She does an amazing job. The way she reacts after he kisses her that first time in the woods, and then she just kind of like panics and runs off. It felt exactly how I would think that she would react in that situation. She was very confused about everything that was going on. That typical story of, that element of it is almost Hallmark movie-esque, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I just always thought this was the guy I'd be with, but this mysterious stranger blew into town. And so, but she makes it all feel very natural. She does an amazing job for the limited screen time she has. I was super impressed. But like I said, when I saw her and I didn't recognize the name at first, I go and I look and I was like, okay, I know a couple of these things, but why does she look so familiar? And it's just because she's just got that look. Like, that's just exactly what you expect to see out of a starlet of this time. And it was super impressive.
And so much so that she becomes a somewhat regular Universal monster player after this movie. So because immediately after that, we get the third Frankenstein movie, The Ghost of Frankenstein. And she's in that. And then a year after that, she shows up in the third of the Dracula movies, again, opposite Lon Chaney and Son of Dracula. So she
did an Invisible Man sequel too, didn't she?
Did she? The Invisible Man's Revenge. Yeah. That was not the one with Price. That was John Carradine.
Yeah. So obviously they enjoyed her performance too, because she was now in that Universal movie actor well.
Yeah, it looks like she stops working in 1950, which we're looking at this. She starts in 1938, finishes working in 1950. That's probably around the time that the studio system would have said, something like, "Listen, darling, we're passing you up for a younger actress.
Right.
Unfortunate that that's the sort of thing that happened back in those days. Unless you were someone like Betty Davis, you really didn't continue working after a certain age. But boy, what an amazing 12-year span here. I mean, more than a movie a year for those 12 years. It's insane when you look at the breadth of work here. And you're right. I mean, she does such an amazing job here. I often wonder why today the same actors and same actresses are in every fucking movie, man. Because if you look back on the 1940s, the 1950s, there were like 100 fucking actors in everything.
And they weren't all named Chris.
No, they weren't all named Chris. You know, there were 100 fucking actors at one studio. And they were in all of those studios' movies. And then when their contract was up, they moved to a different studio. And there was an endless list of actors, and always new actors coming in as old actors retired or were, unfortunately set out to pasture. Right. So I don't understand why we continue to have the same actors in fucking everything. And yes, I realize that I have championed Pascal to be in fucking everything.
Yes.
All right.
He will escort us all after the end of the world.
Yeah. Excluding him. All right. Everyone else, like, stop. Give new actors a fucking chance, man. Who knows when the next Evelyn Ankers is going to show up? Because she wasn't just beautiful, she was really fucking talented.
Yeah.
And when you start looking at some of these actors that you see on TV shows that they're, in a bit role, and you're like, why isn't this person working more? It's not their fault. It's the studios, man. The studios keep relying on the same bankable stars so that they can pump, millions and millions of dollars behind movies that are never going to make it back anymore, because that's not the reality we live in anymore. Everything's changed after
whatever
COVID.
The newest thing we're shitting out with Timothy Chalamet is.
Right. Thank you. Timothy Chalamet. I like that. Okay, so if I mention one more person, it's going to be Maria Ospinskaya as
nice.
Melina. She is the perfect counterpart to Claude Rains's Sir John Talbot, because when you stop and you think about the two characters of Bella and Larry, each of them is cursed with the family curse, right? Now Larry gains this other curse, right? But really his real curse is that, like, he and his dad can't fix shit.
Right.
And that turns him into a monster, right? Yes, Bella bites him. But that unsolved problem festers, it becomes toxic, and that's really what kills him. And Maria Ospinskaya as Maliva, Claude Rains as Sir John, they're the same character from different perspectives. Each wants to protect the son and is failing miserably at it. The amount of love that you see there is presented differently, though. And it's what's really interesting to me is to see a maternal figure that's cold.
Yeah.
The way she is. Because she knows that that's what he needs. And that's what Larry needs at that moment. Like, hey, listen, you shut the fuck up and you listen to me. Because I'm gonna learn you some knowledge right now. This is what you got to know. Now, fucking do something about that shit, because otherwise it's gonna kill you.
Yeah,
and you're gonna and you're gonna kill a lot of fucking people. If his dad had sat down with him and spoken with him in that way, does the movie even end up happening?
Right,
I don't
right.
know, because there's this estrangement between them, and we never really know what it is that goes on that brings them to this point where, like, it's the death of a brother, the death of a son that's bringing these two together again. It's sad and kind of beautiful. It allows you to kind of reflect on your own relationships with your family. You know, am I letting shit get in the way here? Am I being cold and distant? And I really love that counterbalance of Maliva and John, because they are the same character but played differently for the different cultures that we see represented here. And one is not necessarily given more respect than the other. I really, really dig that. Like, the more luxurious of the families is not necessarily presented as better
Right.
than the nomadic people, because in the end it's like, this your curse is your curse. I mean, fucking deal with your shit or don't. You're gonna fucking die.
I mean, dude, she sums it up perfectly. I mean, she says it a couple times through the movie, and it is it's this type of thing that you just that makes a movie like this stand the test of time, dude. That little bit she says, the way you walked was thorny through no fault of your own, but as the rain enters the soil, the river enters the sea, and your tears run to a predestined end. It's
What a great
so
line.
it's so fucking good. Like that's poetry. That's incredible. That's just absolutely amazing. And it's this perfect little eulogy, little family saying, kind of presented in this way as just Romani wisdom. But it sums up so many things so well. And the way that she delivers it, like, I did it no justice just reading it. The way that she so perfectly delivers it time after time at just the right moment. It was so good. Like, she's incredible. I mean, and she's
Yeah.
not somebody I know from anything else. I wouldn't have dared to try to pronounce her name. And so, but she did a great job. I was super impressed with her.
I always dare. But to date, no one has actually written us a strongly worded email saying, like, hey, Dave, fucking cut it out. You don't know how to say these names. Until then, I'm going to assume that I'm in the ballpark. There's no chance that I'm getting anywhere near. You know what? I got a Russian uncle. I'm going to start asking him before this stuff. I'm like, hey, Alexi, how the fuck do you say this? Because she might actually, she is Russian.
Yeah.
You know, but this guy, he's Romanian or whatever, but how would you say this?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so that's, that does it for most of the characters. But as we are wont to do through the year of the monster, we are now going to create our category that will be specifically for our werewolf. So, as in a section that we're calling Harry Howlers, let's talk about the werewolf as presented here. Now, we've kind of got two parts to talk about, which makes the werewolf an interesting monster to do, because we need to talk about Larry Talbot and we need to talk about the Wolfman, who play out as two different characters. And we've spent some time talking about Larry Talbot, but tell us about his evolution into Wolfman, and what you thought of all of that.
It is very easy, I think, to play a character like the Wolfman as too silly. I think it's very easy to go overboard and turn it into a Looney Tunes character.
Like Werewolf Bar Mitzvah.
Yes. It never became a caricature.
Right.
And I think that speaks to Lon Chaney Jr.'s ability to bring respect and seriousness to everything. There's also something in his eyes. There's a softness to him, as big a man as he is, because he cuts an imposing figure.
Yeah, dude, I had to go and look up how tall he was because there are scenes in this movie where he just towers above everyone else.
He towers over Claude Rains, who was not a small man.
Yeah, he's billed on the internet as he was 6'2". So, you know, for the 40s, that's a big old dude.
That is a big old dude. Yeah, because like Claude Rains was taller than Humphrey Bogart, but Bogey may have been only nominally taller than I am. So
right. All things in perspective.
Right. I love that Jack Pierce's makeup preserved his eyes.
Yes.
Because that's something that Pierce did for every one of his characters. And we talked about Gilman. That was not a Jack Pierce makeup job. I can't remember her name now, but she did a fantastic job there. But I think that specifically is a universal monster that they try to remove the humanity from.
Right.
So that you as the audience have to dig for that humanity there. To be able to look at the Wolfman and see Larry Talbot's eyes, and you don't see anything else of Larry Talbot there. I think that that's a brilliant decision, because if you watch Werewolf of London, you can still see the actor. You're like, that's him. And it was done specifically because originally this was what you see in our background. That was the original idea Jack Pierce had for Werewolf of London. And they're like, no, we got to see his face. People have to be able to recognize him. It worked for the story. For this, though, it works better if you don't recognize him. But we as the audience see that humanity in his eyes, that everywhere he goes, there's an internal struggle there. Man, I don't know that very many actors in the Universal stable could have done this performance. I'm fairly certain Boris Karloff could not have done this. I think Bela Lugosi could have, if he were younger when this movie was made. There is a magic to this thing. And of all the Universal monster movies, I'm talking like just like the main ones, you know, not all the sequels and all that. But you know, your Dracula, you know, Frankenstein and Bride, Creature, that stuff. First Mummy. This might be my least favorite of all the movies, but this performance, I think, is easily the best monster performance because of how much humanity Lon Chaney Jr. brings to this monster. It's absolutely insane. And it's why I keep coming back to this movie. It's Lon Chaney Jr. There's a lot of other characters that we talked about. There's a lot of great story elements that we talked about. But it's Lon Chaney Jr. that keeps me coming back to this.
Yeah, it's, you know, and I talked about this earlier. It's real easy to kind of look at this version of the Wolfman, of a werewolf, and if you're just ignorant, has, you know, negative connotations, but I don't mean it in a bad way. Just if your only experience with werewolves is, you know, Twilight and some of that newer stuff, then this is probably a comical look to you. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't disagree more. I think that by keeping this as a man who is a wolf, not just turning a guy into a wolf completely, totally, and wholly, I think that tells a better and a very different story. Because like you said, there, when he's peeking out behind the tree and he's looking at the gravedigger, and you see it, you're right, it's in his eyes. You see that moment where he knows what he's about to do. He knows that he can't stop it. He knows he's completely and totally overcome by this urge and that he has to kill. But you see that it pains him. You see that it's not a decision that he wants to make. He just doesn't have a choice in the matter. And
Yeah.
I can only solely and 100% attribute that to the fact that Lon Chaney Jr. was so damn good at this, that this makeup was so perfect for the story that they're trying to tell. And while it may have sounded like I was throwing shade at Twilight movies, and I've done that plenty in the past, the story that they're
There's no need to
telling,
punch down.
right, the stories that they're telling with the werewolves that they have work just fine.
Mhm.
They make sense in that universe. In this universe, in this movie, this is the werewolf we need. We need the one that is human. We need the one that is a wolf man. And so, one, I think that they did a stellar job with the way that they put this together. Like you said, that you can still see it in his eyes, but all of his features have been altered. Two, there is something incredible about going back. Now, his initial transformation, it's really kind of rough as he's like pulling up his pant legs and you're watching him slowly turn into the wolf legs. But the end of this, when he transforms back, that's a stellar transformation. Like that is the one that you watch that and you go, Landis loved this and said, I can do this, but I can do it with what I have now.
Right.
You watch that change back and you immediately know where Landis drew inspiration for what he did. What, 40 or 30 years later? 40, I can't remember the exact year, 30 or 40 years later, right? It was early
40.
40,
Yeah,
yeah,
it
early
was 80
80s.
or 81.
Yeah, early 80s. So 40 years later. But you watch this and because that transformation back into a man is so damn good. They did, to the point that when it was over, my roommate looks at me and goes, there was apparently a jump in like makeup technology between filming day 8 and filming day 16, right? he was like, because those transformations were drastically different, but it made sense for them to happen that the way that they did. We needed that moment where we got to see him gradually go back, because in that moment, his dad is being faced with what he was just forced to do. And we're seeing it through his eyes. We're seeing Talbot go back, and he's having to slowly come to grips with the fact that he just killed his son. And so I thought that all of that was good. This monster, man, I think you're right. Like, yes, I liked Black Lagoon and Bride a bit more than this. I like this movie plenty, but I do think that those are both better movies. But I think that so far, and like I said, with my experience being Bela Lugosi's Dracula, the Boris Karloff's Monster, and Gilman, this is my favorite monster of going back through watching these, because there's something very, very different. We always talk about how those others make you understand something about being human. There's this really weird thing about the Wolfman that makes you understand something about like primal urges and this idea of getting back to kind of where man started, not like the current human condition, right? But about the de-evolution of man and what can happen when that lizard brain part is now in control. And he so perfectly put that on the screen. I'm not wishing that there was more of him, because I think that the way that they did it with how much of him we got was great. But I do kind of wish there was more of him, because I do really, really like this monster. I think that it was perfectly done.
Well, you are somewhat in luck, because the Wolfman sequels, which are not actually direct sequels, are this Wolfman. They never really explain how he comes back. He's not dead.
Somehow the Wolfman returned.
Somehow the Wolfman returns. The very next movie in the Universal Monsters series is Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And in it serves
that's Bela Lugosi's monster, right?
Right. So it serves as the fourth movie in the Frankenstein series and the second movie in the werewolf series, and is the first of the unified Universal monsters, because at that point we had 3 Dracula movies, we had 3 Frankenstein movies, we had the Wolfman, we had the Invisible Man, and we had maybe 2 or 3 Invisible Man. Mummy movies. No, 1 Mummy movie, 2 or 3 Invisible Man movies. I can't remember exactly now. It's been a minute since I've read up on this and watched all of these. I did one big binge many, many years ago. And there's still a couple that I rewatch. That's the one that brings it all together, is Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And there's a reason why the idea of Frankenstein as like the blind monster, exists.
Right.
And it goes back to Ghost of Frankenstein. It goes back to this one, the fourth one, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And after that is where we start to get more of the monsters joining in, but it's always Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. And That's awesome. Is that character. So in House of Dracula, it is this Wolfman. In House of Frankenstein, it is this Wolfman. And then finally, when we get what I think is the granddaddy of all the Universal Monsters cinematic universe, believe it or not, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
I was about to say, you're going to say Abbott and Costello, aren't you?
It's him as the Wolfman. It's absolutely fantastic. And it's Bela Lugosi's Dracula. I mean, you can't beat it, really. The only thing that would have made it better is if Boris Karloff had come back as Frankenstein. He doesn't, but it's a pretty fantastic movie, and it's a great way to, because that is kind of where the Wolfman ends with that one.
Okay.
And it is, I think, also where Dracula and where Frankenstein kind of meet their end. It's right there, because after that they move on to, Abbott and Costello meet the Mummy. No, it was the Invisible Man, then the Mummy, but it was individually. They didn't kind of bring all of the monsters in at that point, and so that movie does kind of serve as the capstone, and it's when you start looking at the, I guess it would be 4 or 5 movies that the Wolfman is featured in. It's a beautiful story arc, and it's one of redemption. He's constantly looking to redeem himself and to make up for his shortcomings in that first movie. It's fantastic. It's really, really great.
Yeah, well, that is probably going to be a summer thing for me next year, because like I said, the more of these we've watched, the deeper and deeper I do enjoy being into this. So I mean, there you have it, right? Mm-hmm. We've talked about this for longer than the movie ran, so it's about time that we rate this thing, right? So if you are new to the podcast, you just need a quick refresher. We never rate a movie against other movies. We've talked about plenty of other Universal movies, plenty of other werewolf movies, but we are only looking at what the Wolfman brings us. So as we only think a movie should be compared to itself, for every movie that we rate here on Shiver, we use a unique rating system. And again, moments that made me laugh. This is the one I had to go with. So Dave, out of a possible 5 twiddle notes, make a note, twiddle. What do you give the Wolfman?
Here's the thing, because I've waxed poetic about this movie. I don't think it's perfect. And I can't put my finger on why. I hate when this happens. I hate when I'm like, man, I'm not going to give it a perfect 5 twiddle notes. Also tell you why it's not going to get a perfect 5 twiddle notes. I don't know why. So I'm going to give it 4.5 twiddle notes. And about 3.5 of them are for Claude Rains.
Fair.
And the rest is Lon Chaney Jr. I mean, fuck, man, this movie really is about the character moments for me. It's why I come back to it. I did say at the top of the show that Werewolf of London is the one I prefer. That said, I don't rewatch Werewolf of London. I do rewatch this one though. Werewolf of London, kind of like Frankenstein and Dracula, really sobering. You know,
Right.
it's so straightforward. More horror, no humor. Good. I think it's got a better story than this one, but rewatchability, no, man. This is where it's at, and this is where I think, you know, if you're looking to do werewolf stuff, you don't have to be a fan of the golden age of Hollywood to appreciate this one. I think that anyone can watch this and say, man, that was a really good movie.
Yeah. You took word for word exactly what I was going to say, which is I don't know why. I don't know why. As much as we've been on this thing for an hour 15 now, I don't know why it's not 5, but it's not. But it's not worth losing an entire twiddle note for whatever that one thing that I can't figure out is. There's a piece missing here, and I just got to keep rolling until I find it. But I too, I'm going to go 4.5 twiddle notes. I enjoyed the hell out of it. I think that it brought a lot of great stuff. And you're right. This one is more about character interactions than a lot of the other ones, than making you view something in a grander picture. This really is the story of the people contained in this movie, and it does an amazing job of that. And so yeah, it's absolutely 4.5 twiddle notes.
Well, there you have it. It is 4.5. No math needed. I love that. So thank you for those of you that joined us for the duration of this, and make sure that you join us next week, because we're going to be continuing our month, the werewolf. Did we decide which one we were doing next week?
We're in flux right now due to some streaming issues, but we've got 2 on hand. We've got one idea. If we can't find it, we've got a backup. So make sure you head to shiverpod.com, where you can find links to all of our social media sites. We are on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. All of those things at ShiverPod. Make sure you follow us there, and you will know as soon as we know exactly what next week's movie is going to be. Try to drop some memes and stuff on there. School's been a little hectic, so not staying super current with it, but I do try to always make sure you know what movie's coming up in case you want to watch us live. So keep an eye on it. We'll let you know soon.
Absolutely. So on behalf of all of us here at Shiver, fright you very much.